All right. Good afternoon and welcome to this post-lunch session. I think most of the folks are still struggling with their pies. So in interest of time, I think we'll get started. Post-lunch sessions, especially the ones after lunch, immediately after lunch, are a little challenging, and I'll try my best to keep you all awake. Okay. We'll talk about Commerce Cloud development. Commerce Cloud is not a subject you'll hear at a lot of conferences, primarily because the entry barrier in Commerce Cloud is a little higher as compared to Marketing Cloud, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, and I'll talk through some of those aspects as well. So over the next 25 minutes or so, I'll talk about B2B commerce, B2C commerce. I'll talk about how and why Salesforce has kind of pivoted to a mobile-first approach. We'll do a deep dive into the architecture, the MVC architecture. We'll talk about Site Genesis, which is the legacy architecture. We'll talk about SFRA, Storefront Reference Architecture. This is the new architecture. And if the demo gods are kind, we'll do some demos on B2C commerce, Site Genesis, SFRA, before we do a recap of the important concepts, and then finally I'll open up the floor for some questions and answers. Okay, so before we begin, just a quick sampling of the audience, and I don't think the online audience can participate in this, but just to get a perspective, how many of us here are developers? A show of hands. So developers are folks who always say it's not a bug, it's a feature. I think that's what we've kind of been programmed to do. I have kind of used this as my first line of defense for the last 20 years. So if you are a developer, if you have not used this, take my word for it and try it out. It works. Any designers in the house? Yeah. So designers are a species which talks in terms of styles and CSS. And as you can see, my style is I'm obese, and the overflow is clearly visible as well. End users, regardless of whether you are building an e-commerce application or any web application, these are people who eventually decide the fate of your application, if it's going to be successful. If they are happy, you are happy, and if they have this expression, then this will eventually get transferred to you and your application as well. A little bit about myself. This is me. So I became a Salesforce MVP a few years back. I'm a Salesforce certified instructor. I like to say that I've kind of grown old with the Salesforce ecosystem. I started off in 2007. It's been about 12 years and going strong and getting old so far. I've presented a number of times at Dreamforce. As I mentioned, I'm a certified technical instructor, so I teach Commerce Cloud courses, and I lead a developer group in Jaipur, which is also called as the Pink City in India. On a personal front, I have two kids, 11-year-old princess, a 6-year-old brat, my son, and then one wife. So let's talk about e-commerce. So this is one of the slides I picked from the Salesforce marketing material. What it really talks about is how e-commerce has changed as a paradigm in the last decade or so. So more than 50% of e-commerce traffic these days comes from mobile. There has been 100% year-on-year growth in social commerce. What is social commerce? You look up a deal on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and then you decide to buy it. One of the important things is gone are the days when you would just walk into a store and buy products. You typically, even if you go into a store, you would actually try and get a better deal digitally, and that phenomenon is kind of growing. Another important aspect is that 25%, so mostly one-in-one purchases spans across multiple touch points. So it may be that you looked up a product on your desktop, you decided to buy it from your mobile, or you looked up something on your iPad and then you decided to order it through your watch. So our habits are changing, our e-commerce habits are changing as well. A little bit of context in terms of B2B versus B2C. This is important for several reasons. Because Salesforce marketing team, they are very good at rebranding products. Unfortunately, that causes a lot of confusion as well. So Commerce Cloud, as we call it, earlier used to be called Demandware. Then it was called SFCC or Salesforce Commerce Cloud. Now it's called B2C Commerce. They acquired a company called Cloud Craze and rebranded it as B2B Commerce. From a functional perspective, these are intrinsically different. B2B commerce, you are actually selling to businesses, and the businesses then sell to the eventual customer. B2C commerce, you build a storefront which is actually used directly by the end customers. So this session is primarily going to focus on the B2C aspects, which is also called Demandware, SFCC, or Salesforce Commerce Cloud. Let me talk a little bit about the architecture. So this architecture is very similar to some of the other cloud offerings from Salesforce. So at the bottom layer, you have the platform operations or the DevOps. It's a multi-tenant architecture, secure. There is a global release model, which is not similar to Salesforce. B2C commerce follows a monthly release cycle. Then you have a retail data model, which is objects like products, inventories, orders, typical operations that you could think of in an e-commerce environment. Then what Salesforce has done really well over the last year or so, they have integrated Einstein into Commerce Cloud. So you have product recommendations, you have predictive emails based on a user's buying history. Einstein is able to predict what could be the products that this user is to likely buy. And based on that, it would send you an email recommendation. The way we extend B2C commerce is through an API integration layer, so we call it OCAPI. And then the B2C commerce has solutions for not just digital, but for in-store as well. And lastly, you have customer interaction, which is all the touch points. So it could be your phone, it could be a tablet, it could be in-store solutions, it could be kiosks, and there are multiple such touch points. This is the physical architecture of B2C commerce. So you have data centers, geographically split across multiple components. Then you have pods, or what we call as point of deliveries. Point of deliveries is analogous to an instance. So for example, an NA1 instance or a NA44, which is the kind of notorious instance which goes down very frequently. So a pod is equivalent to an instance. Then you have a concept of realms. Realm is basically an equivalent of a Salesforce org. It's a logical abstraction for a customer. Then you have these servers, which we call as primary instance group and secondary instance group. Primary includes your production server, your staging server, which is used to enrich data, development server, which is kind of a misnomer because this is used for things like user acceptance testing. And then you have sandboxes where developers typically build functionality. So when I started, I mentioned that the entry barrier to Commerce Cloud is a little bit high. The reason for that is it's not easy to get access to these sandboxes. To get this, you need to either be a partner, registered Commerce Cloud partner with Salesforce, or you need to attend one of the official training classes, and that's how you get access to these. The last couple of years have been very interesting as far as B2C commerce evolution is concerned. This is one of my favorite slides. What it really represents is there is a phone, there is a tablet, there is a laptop, and there is a desktop. It shows the number of phones we have on planet Earth is more than the number of tablets, which is more than the number of laptops, which in turn is more than the number of desktops, which are mostly on the verge of extinction. Okay, so there is a very good use case to kind of build everything for mobile and tablets as compared to the desktop, and that's exactly the direction in which B2C commerce has gone over the last couple of years. I pulled in some statistics as well. This is true for all sites, but more so for e-commerce sites. More than half users would actually not recommend a business with a bad mobile site. 40% would actually turn to a competitor's site after they have a bad mobile experience. And 1 in 4 users would curse their phone and use adjectives, which I can't really use right now when a site doesn't work. And I'm sure we all have done this at some point of time. So let's understand what was the legacy architecture and why Salesforce needed to change that legacy architecture. It was called Site Genesis. It was an MVC implementation, but it was not a pure MVC implementation. The view layer was, it's a language called ISML, which is Internet Store Markup Language. This dates back several years to the world of Demandware. They built a proprietary framework which served well for a few years, but it's kind of bulky and not the best performance. Models were not an actual representation abstraction, logical abstraction of the data. And then there was no separation of concern. Your models were interacting with the view, and the view was interacting with controller, which is not how MVC is supposed to work. This is what the site looked like, and I'll actually show a demo towards the end as well. This is what we call as site genesis. If you built an application using B2C commerce until a couple of years back, this would be the default look and feel, and then you could customize it based on your requirements. This architecture had number of inherent limitations. That's why Salesforce introduced what they call as SFRA. Again, the marketing army from Salesforce has been at work. This was originally called MFRA, which was Mobile First Reference Architecture. But they decided that it was kind of giving an impression that this is only for mobile. So they kind of rebranded it to call it SFRA, which is the Storefront Reference Architecture, where storefront essentially refers to your e-commerce site. How is this different? This is obviously mobile first. So the idea is whatever experience you get on a desktop, you get the same experience on a mobile or a tablet as well. This has been built based on 2,000 customer stores which are live and running on B2C commerce for the last several years. And the overall idea was to kind of shorten the development cycle, be able to make rapid customizations and updates. And then in terms of the architecture itself, it's a little bit similar to what we had seen. It's just that the API layer is now more extensible, and then on the UI side, you obviously have a lot of mobile compatibility. In terms of MVC architecture, now there is a clear separation of concern. You don't have each layer talking to the other layer. You have a more pure implementation of MVC. This is what a SFRA site would by default look like. This is what it looks like on a desktop, and I'll show it to you on a phone as well. And it renders just as well across any form factor, and that's what has been built into SFRA. Okay, so let me just do a quick demo, and I'll show you what a B2C sandbox looks like. So it's very different to a Salesforce org if you're used to that. So this is the typical sandbox look and feel. We call this the business manager. This is used primarily by developers as well as administrators and business users. You would typically select a site. So for example, site genesis is the legacy site, and I could launch what this site would look like if I click the storefront link. This is thanks to UK and the GDPR compliance. We did not have this earlier. This is something which we need to do anytime the user comes on the site for the first time. And then it's really more like any e-commerce site that you would go. So there are categories, and since today is Women's Day, so let me actually go to a women's category. I could go to earrings. I could go to an earring. I could do usual operations that I would do on any e-commerce site. I can add it to cart. I can view cart, and then I can buy this as well. And since this is a mock site, I don't really need to pay anything. But the idea is that you can do all the operations here. In comparison to this, this is what a SFRA site looks like. Okay, so if you look at it, it's much more sleek in terms of the overall user experience, a very crisp experience. Just to even things out, I'll choose the men's category, and we'll look at a product. And then you'll see that everything here is kind of laid out in tiles, which is a big change from what it was earlier. So again, I can go to a product. I can select whatever size I need to. I can select width. And then again, I can add the product to the cart as well. Since I mentioned that the primary use case here is that SFRA is more conducive to mobile, so let me actually show you how these look like on a mobile device. So first, let me show you site genesis. This was the legacy site which I had shown you. It kind of renders okay, but as and when you start doing more operations, so for example, some images are being cut off. I can't really, this is not a usable control on a mobile device. And then if I change orientations, it doesn't really adapt that well as well. So there were a number of limitations, and in comparison to this, if I open the SFRA version, so I have an accordion interface which I'm kind of used to seeing in a number of mobile sites or applications. The products are actually laid out in a tiled manner, which is again much more easy. And then there are things like carousels, which are obviously tailored for mobile as well. And then I can do the operations using buttons, which are a little more accessible. Okay, so all in all, from a UI perspective, SFRA has actually been designed for a mobile first experience. Let me actually show a little bit of development as well. So as opposed to Salesforce development, which you used to do in IDEs like Illuminated Cloud or any other IDE, and now we're kind of standardizing on Visual Studio Code. We use Eclipse, and we use something which we call as digital development plugin, which is a plugin. And this is all JavaScript. This is not Apex. This is not Visualforce. This is all JavaScript development. So if I were to write a very similar controller which prints a hello world kind of a thing, so I'll just expose a function, I'll set the content type, and then I'll write whatever I need to. Okay, and if I execute this, I would basically tell the name of the controller here, and if I execute this, it would show me the message. This is a very similar, very simple hello world controller, but the idea is we'll not actually build controllers like this when we are writing an e-commerce site. We might actually want to write a controller which basically shows a product. This is a little more complex, but the actual controllers are very, very complex. So we do a bunch of manipulation. We check a parameter. Based on the parameter, whether it's found or not found, we render some templates. And these templates, as I mentioned earlier, are in a proprietary framework called ISML. So let me actually show you what this controller would look like. So I'll just run this controller. This is the name is JShow product. And so for example, it's a laptop briefcase with wheels. And if I click on this, I can actually go and look at the actual product details. In this case, this does not exist, so it's giving me an error. But you get the idea that this is how you would invoke a controller and how you would pass a parameter. And then your controllers can obviously be very complex. This is a simple ISML template, which is basically my view. So it has tags which are very similar to any other markup language. You can write your own custom tags. You can use the standard tags, which we call as ISML tags. So all in all, your development is mostly in JavaScript as well as some proprietary frameworks like ISML. Some case studies. Salesforce has actually done very well in terms of getting new clients for Demandware or B2C commerce ever since the acquisition happened a couple of years back. So Puma is one of the largest implementations. There's Lancomi, some of the big ones, Rack Room Shoes, and they keep signing a number of new ones on a monthly basis as well. From a financials perspective, B2C commerce is sold on a revenue sharing. So whenever a customer buys B2C commerce, Salesforce basically takes a specific percentage cut out of the revenues. As a developer or as an architect, what is in it for you? So these two certifications, just in case you don't know, the CTA or the Certified Technical Architect is the rarest of the rare certification. And then the next two are actually Certified Commerce Cloud Digital Developer and Technical Solutions Designer. So these are tough certifications, but again, if you learn the concepts, if you practice, there's a good chance that you'll pass. And since there are no Salesforce people in the room, I can proudly say that these are the only two certifications for which you will not find any dumps on the internet. So you need to know your concepts to pass the exams. Some references. I talked about mobile first. I talked a little bit about site genesis, the old architecture, SFRA, the new architecture. I talked about some of the success stories. Again, it's a fairly closed ecosystem. We have a site called Exchange, which is basically the trailblazer community of B2C commerce. You need to be a partner or you need to attend a official training to get access to Exchange. And then there are a bunch of videos on YouTube from Dreamforce as well as other events as well. Any questions I can answer? Yes. A little bit about the difference between the B2B and the B2C. Yeah, so B2B commerce, the offering was earlier called CloudCraze. It's a company that Salesforce acquired last year. There, the development that you'll do is usual Apex, Visualforce, and then Lightning. B2C is all done in JavaScript and frameworks like ISML. And from a functional perspective, B2B is when you are building a storefront for other businesses and they in turn would sell things to the eventual customer. B2C is that you are directly selling, like I'm Amazon and I want to sell the product to a number of customers. That's more of a B2C engagement.
Kind of transaction?
It is a very different kind of transaction.
And it's native inside Salesforce?
It is all native inside Salesforce, yes. And then there are connectors as well, which again Salesforce has done a decent job of providing. So if you have information in Service Cloud or Sales Cloud and you want to hook it to Commerce Cloud, that's possible using those connectors as well.
So it's a completely different set of tools?
Yeah, it's very different, yeah.
Different skill set?
Absolutely, yeah. Any more questions? Okay.
Free edition or developer edition?
Yeah, unfortunately, not as of now, but I keep hearing, and then I think there are some plans to kind of give a tiered down version of sandboxes free towards the end of this year. But again, safe harbor, I don't know when that will happen, but I'm hoping it will happen. Any other questions?
Are there classes available to learn this?
Yes, so there are classes available to learn this. There are classes which happen in APAC, in North America, as well as Europe. And you can find all the information on Salesforce help and training page. If you just search for Commerce Cloud training, it will take you to that page. It's a 4-day class.
Is that a class for B2C or B2B?
It's a there are both classes for B2C and B2B. Yeah, there are both classes.
And for both developer and manager?
Yes, yes.
Different classes?
Different classes, very different skill sets, yes.
I heard that you said in order to have an org access, we need to be a partner or attend a training. If, for an example, if I want to learn about it, can there be any trailhead which will link?
There are trailheads which actually do a very good job of covering the theoretical concepts. What they can't do is provide you access to a sandbox.
I don't know how can I register my customer.
My recommendation would be contact your partner account managers. In a lot of cases, they are able to actually get you access to a sandbox for a week or 2 weeks. But again, there is no standard policy on that as of now. Okay, I think we are just about on time. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.